Hello and welcome to the Preserved Word with Pastor Brad. Today, I have an interesting challenge in that I was talking with some people online and that were, I don't know, had a different viewpoint than me, let's put it that way. And I said, I said, okay, fine. And they made a claim that there were errors in the KJV, which I, I'm not a KJV onlyist. In that I believe that you can only be saved if you read the KJV, or you can only find the 100% correct English reading in the KJV because, and I'll tell you why. Which KJV are you talking about? There's been several, and because the English language has changed, and so the KJV has been updated. The latest version is the New King James. Okay, it's essentially the King James, but it has been updated, right, into modern vernacular. One of the just for an example, if you turn to 1 Corinthians chapter 13, the love chapter, you'll notice that in the 1611 King James, it says charity. I'm not sure what the 1900 says. I could look real quick if you would like. I have the 1900 right here. Let's see. 1 Corinthians 13. Charity. Okay, so the 1900 keeps the word charity in there. But if you look in the New King James, 1 Corinthians 13, you'll see that it's been changed to love. Because the English language has changed. Charity has become a word that we associate with giving to poor people, or to sacrificial giving, however you want to define the word charity. But it definitely doesn't get defined as love, though back then charity was very much defined as more closely with what is meant by agape, this unselfish love. Okay, it was an act of charity. It was an act of unselfish love. Well, that has become, has changed. So to better render the word in our changing language, they've updated it to the word love. So that's why I say that I make the argument I'm not a King James onlyist. And by the way, I did have some good friends on the web that sent me some, because I was saying, well, there's got to be other Bible translations that don't, or versions that don't, that don't consider the critical text, that go off the majority text, or the Textus Receptus. Now, as far as the majority text is concerned, and you can see, by the way, let me just take this opportunity to say this. If you're interested in this topic at all, go read the introduction to your Bible. Okay, and if you're online, or if your Bible app, or even if your paper Bible doesn't have the introduction, go look it up. It's available on the web somewhere, because it tells you there. It's a note from the people who produced the Bible of how they made their decisions. Let me just point out that, let's go to Genesis. Let's just go to the, whoops, I messed up somewhere. Oh, I put first Genesis instead of Genesis 1. Okay, here we go. We go to Genesis and we scroll up. We see, look, there's the introduction. And it gives you some explanations of the footnotes, for instance. Here's the way the New King James renders its footnotes. It says that the NU represents this, the Nestle Elland, and the United Bible Society's 4th edition. They call this the NU text. Okay. And then the M here represents the majority text. Okay. Majority text. And so when you see these pop up as footnotes in the Bible, you know what they refer to. Okay. And also some of their decisions. I like, right here. They go into the viewpoints. Since the 1880s, most contemporary translations of the New Testament have relied upon relatively few manuscripts discovered chiefly in the late 17th century. And it talks about the Vaticanus and the Sinaiticus, which this translation, the King James and the New King James, don't consider. They don't take them into account, except in the footnotes. And you'll see that when they're referenced. This is the majority text. So people ask me, I'm getting ahead of myself. But just read the introduction to your Bible. It'll explain like what the criteria was and everything. And especially, I just love the introduction to the New King James. It's so informative, and it's written really easy to read. It explains its terms, and it's just there are a few things in there you may have to go Google to find out what they're talking about, but for the most part, it's really easy to read. It talks about the format it puts it in. It talks about how it handles King James endings. It talks about how it handles definite articles, all those kinds of things. So it's just very very informative. And the same thing for the New American Standard. Go read the beginning of it. You'll find it's very informative as well. The King James may be a little harder to find. A lot of the King James Bibles don't have the introduction in them. The introduction is quite long, but you can find it online. And of course, it depends on which version you're reading. This is the 1900 I have pulled up here, but the 1611 is a little more difficult to read. Where can I need to pull that up. Oh, well, it doesn't matter. I'll worry about that later. 1611 is available online. It's a lot harder to read because it doesn't even have the same characters. Like, it has a V instead of a U. No, or is that the opposite? It has a U instead of a V. Something like that. So, just the English language has changed so much over time. So then I had some people, so there are more Bibles than the King James. First of all, we in America kind of say King James version of the Bible, but its real name is the Authorized Version. So if you get tired of saying King James, or you get tired of people pigeonhole you into a KJV only, you could say, no, I prefer the Authorized Version of the Bible. That was its sort of official name. So the Authorized Version of the Bible and the King James are pretty much the same thing. But the King James has several editions. And the New King James even calls itself a different version, even though it's based on the same texts. Which is the Textus Receptus. Then you have the modern English version, which I have just recently discovered. And I'm going to do a review of this Bible, by the way. Somebody sent it to me. Modern English version. It's available on YouVersion. It's available on the Bible apps. And I'm going to take a little look at that one. And we'll go over it and but I'm glad that it's out there. Also, I've been doing my own research into the Eastern Orthodox Church and what Bible they use. It's called the EOB, okay? Eastern Orthodox Bible, I believe is what that stands for. And where it comes from, what its history is. It's not, it's fairly recent, but the manuscripts it uses is the majority text instead of the Textus Receptus. And it, which is very interesting. And its history dates back, forever. It's, the Eastern Orthodox Church has always existed. So I don't agree with some of their doctrines, but it's interesting to know that they can trace their Bible, in its original language, in the Greek, all the way back, which is something that the critical text people don't really consider. They don't take a look at that. And I don't know why. It's probably because it didn't help their case. But this show, I wanted to take a look at some of these errors. So I was having a conversation with some people, and they said that the KJV is full of errors. And I said, okay, well, send me a couple and let me take a look at them. Well, so they sent me some lists that they didn't make themselves. They Googled them and then sent them to me. But that's fair enough. But here's the problem with those lists. First of all, I got to 3 different lists. And one was fairly short and concise. One was clearly an over-exaggerated. We'll talk about that in a second. And the other one was in between. It was a lengthy list, but fairly good. Now, my intention when I got these lists, I said, well, how am I going to, because that's not what I asked for. I asked for some examples. And so my intention was, well, I'll just take the first three, so it's not arbitrary, so it's not me picking them. I'm just going to take the first three that they give me from the Old Testament, and then I'll take three from the New Testament because all three lists were in order. And so I said, well, I'll just take three from the Old Testament, three from the New Testament. When I did that, it would have been a very boring show because because in at least two of these lists, the longer lists, 90% of the things listed that were errors, these lists both at the top of the page say errors in the King James, and the things that were listed as errors were not errors. They're not even what anybody would consider an error. 90% of them are, I'd say maybe 85%, 80%. I didn't do math, but most of them listed are just over and over and over again missing definite articles. Let me give you an example of this. We'll just go to Genesis 1 because that's where the first one was listed. What am I in? I'm in the King James. So they listed this right here. This should be in the beginning of the God. That there's a definite article there that is not rendered. And look, I'm not kidding you. Over and over and over and over and over again, this was the error listed about the King James Bible. 90% of the errors were definite articles, or I'd say 80% were definite articles, and the rest were similar. And we'll get into those similar in a minute. But these definite articles those aren't errors. It's just not errors. There's no difference in saying in the beginning God and in the beginning the God. That is not an error. That is an translation into English decision. In other words, it's an English decision. It's a grammar decision. It's not an error. They didn't accidentally miss it or mess it up in any way. And they indicated, now keep in mind, these definite articles in Greek are different than definite articles in English because they're part of the word. There are cases when they're separate, but in almost every case, they're pronounced as part of the word. So Elohim. Well, Elohim has the L in front of it, which means the. It doesn't mean the, that's transposing. But anyway, the point of the matter is it's a definite article within the word. And there's all kinds of that stuff in Greek. Greek words have masculine or feminine. They have, in English, we have plural, right? So we'll have road or roads, but we say it as one word. And we mean there's a road or there's plural roads, right? Well, Greek does that in several different ways. And one of the ways they do that is they incorporate the definite article within the word. So Elohim is pronounced as, written and pronounced as one word. And that's shown, by the way, this is shown, this isn't ignored, this isn't an error. It's shown in the King James by the use of a capital G. The God, talking about God, right? And nobody in English misunderstands this. Whoa. And there are places in the Bible where the Elohim doesn't contain the definite article, but it's the best way I can understand it. And by the way, I'm not a Greek scholar, and I may get this Greek all wrong. Don't take my word for anything I say about the Greek language. Okay, I'm just beginning to learn it. But I do know well enough to know that that's not an error, right? I mean, in English, we don't need the there to get the meaning across that we're talking about God. The capital G does that for us. And then there are places in the Bible, in Psalms 92, and when Jesus quotes Psalms 92 to the Pharisees and Sadducees, he says, is it not written, I said ye were gods? Okay, plural, little g. Okay. So that's indicated that it is talking not, that's indicating the meaning there. Okay. And it's not confusing in English at all. It doesn't need to be there in English. It's not a error. And this is over and over and over again. For instance, there's a place that they brought up. In 1 John 5:7, where it says there are 3 witnesses in heaven, then they said that was an error because it should be 3 witnesses in the heaven. It's just, I just shake my head because that's not an error. It's just English. It's just a way you would interpret. Now, if you were to translate it, the God or the heaven, I wouldn't consider that an error either. Okay, you're just making a decision of how to render that in English. Now, let's get to some better ones. Okay, let's get to some different ones here. One of the errors that was sent to me, this was the first one that was listed that wasn't a definite article problem that was given to me, was right here in verse 2 of Genesis, where it says, the earth was without form and void. And the error listed that was sent to me was. that should have been became. That in the King James, it's an error. It should have been became. The earth became without form and void. So I did some research on this, and first of all, every modern translation of the Bible that I could find, including the Net Bible, the most critical of all of the Bibles, renders this word as was. Then I did some research just to find a good article about this. I did find a really good one on answersingenesis.org. Answersingenesis.org is not a King James. They don't support the King James Version of the Bible. They're just they really focus on Genesis. It's a great website, by the way. They had an article about why you would, or what the controversy was about this being translated as was versus became. That word was in Hebrew. Hebrew is accurately translated as was. It means was almost all the time. It can mean became if the context requires it. In other words, if there's something in the context that stated that there was something that was previous and then it changed, it became something afterwards, then it became. And they listed an example, and I've forgotten what it was, somewhere else in the Bible. But that case does not exist here. In other words, for that word to be translated became here, the earth would have had to say the earth had form and then became without form. Then that word could be translated became. Okay? So, and by the way, like I said, every version, I looked at every version I could find. All the big ones. I didn't look at every version, but I looked at NASB. I looked at the Net Bible. I looked at Living. I looked at RSV, ESV, and they all had was. So listing this as an error means that everybody translated it wrong. It also goes against people who know more than me, scholarship about what this word should be translated as. So I simply just reject it as an error. I don't think it is an error. And I don't see any, by the way, there was no explanation as to why it was an error. It was just stated that it was an error. So I don't have anything else to go on other than to say that I couldn't find any support for it. By the way, the article in Answers in Genesis did say that the only reason to translate this as became is not textual. It doesn't come from the text. It comes from a philosophy of saying there has to be a gap. So this is a result of the gap theory. If you're saying that there's millions of years between verse 1 and verse 2, that's called the gap theory, by the way, trying to fit the scientific millions of years into the Bible, then it would have to exist between verse 1 and verse 2, and that was, and that's how the earth developed and had life and everything evolved, and then it became void. Then it became empty because of the comet hitting the earth and killing everything. Okay. And then God created everything after that. So that theory, which has no basis in the Bible whatsoever, no support that I know of anyway. This isn't a show about the gap theory, but that's the reason for making this became, according to that article. But the guy who said it was an error didn't give me any support for it being an error. It wasn't, it was just a list. But anyway, let's move on to something more interesting because I really like this one. Okay, Acts 2:6. So what I did was, by the way, I said I was going to list 3 from the Old Testament, 3 from the New Testament, but because of all the definite article stuff, it would just be definite article arguments. So what I did was I looked for their best. I went through and said, okay, give me some good stuff. What is your best argument for an error in the King James Version? And so I picked through and went through and tried to find the ones that really stand out as it claims to be errors. And then I took a look at that. All right. So let's look at Acts 2:6. This is listed as an error. And when the sound occurred. Let me go back to the King James. The 1900 version, excuse me. Acts 2:6. Okay. Now, when this noised abroad, the multitude came together, and they were confounded, because that every man heard them speak in his own language. Okay? So the phrase here that is at question is when the noised abroad, which to our English word, to our English ears, makes very little sense. But in 1900, they didn't have this problem because that phrase would have made sense to them. There is a little footnote here in my 1900 that says when this voice was made. The NASB has it rendered as Acts 2:6. And when this sound occurred. And the New King James says, and when this sound occurred. This is listed as an error, which I think is just... let me start back at when. When this noise abroad. There we go. This shows to me the bias of trying to show error in the King James. Did the King James get it wrong? That's an error. Does this phrase make sense to modern ears? No, I'll grant you that. That's why I'm not married to the 1611 or even this is the 1900 version or edition of the King James. Our English language evolves and changes, and so these phrases, like this one, don't make as much sense to us as they did in 1900 or probably even 1611. I haven't looked at this phrase in 1611. I assume it says noised abroad, though. My point is it's not an error. It is an error in the English language. It is pointing out a weakness in the English language. I don't even think it's an error. It was rendered correctly by the King James scholars, authorized version scholars that put together the authorized version of the Bible, rendered this in English as best they could, and it was proper at the time. The English language has changed, and so this phrase now reads what? And when this noise occurred. If you want to go to a very literal translation, you could say when the sound of this wind passed through, I think is the literal thing there. Or I don't even think it says sound. I think it says when this rush of wind passed through or something like that. But nevertheless, and again, if you look at, like I said before, when you read the introduction to these Bibles, when you read if you want to get the Young's literal translation, it's almost unreadable, but it is a literal translation of word for word, Greek to English. But you're not going to get meaning because those idioms and those phrases, like this one right here, don't carry. This one right here, don't carry the same meaning today as they did when they were rendered in English in this case 1900 or 1611 or whenever. So this isn't an error. It needs to be updated to a modern language, which is not a problem. it's not like an error is when the King James got it wrong. It didn't get it wrong. It rendered it correctly. But, so maybe I need to redefine what I mean by error. This did come with a note, by the way, on the list of it, because one of these lists didn't have notes. One of them did have notes as to what was wrong with the passage. And in this one, it did say, when the noise abroad is incorrect, it's the correct, it says the correct rendering, and then has quotes, and this sound having taken place, which doesn't even match any of the versions that I've referenced. So according to him, they're all wrong, because they don't have that exact phrasing. All right, let's get to something meatier. Let's get to something that I actually found interesting to research, that actually had some kind of meaning to it. Oh, you know what? I was supposed to do this one next. Okay, fine. We'll do this one next. This one's a little better, and then we'll do the really good one. Okay, I'll save the really good one for last. 1 John 5:19. Let's look at it in the King James first. Okay. Again, I'm looking at the 1900 here, but the 1900 and the big difference between the 1900 and the 1611 is just Old English. It's just updated a little bit, but the words are almost the same if you can read them. Should I pull that up? I have the 1611. You can go look at it. It's interesting to look at. Let's see. Where is it at? Oh, here it is. Okay. I don't even know if I can do this. Let's see if I can do it. Oops. Nope. Okay. That's what I was afraid of. Okay. Let's see if I can adjust this without causing it to disappear. Here we go. Okay. First, I want to go to 1 John. Oh, here we go. Let's go over here. 1 John 5:19. Just to give you a little taste of what the 1611 looks like. Okay, I'll get down to 19. So the 1611. Look at this verse in 16 here. Is that big enough? Can you see it? I hope so. If any man see his brother sin, notice that sin is spelled with two N's and an E. His brother is sin a sin, which is not unto, which has a V instead of a U. Death, he, two E's, shall ask, with an E at the end, and he shall Giue him life. What? Give. The U there is, so the V, the U is a V and the V is a U. Give him life for them that sin not unto death. There is a sin unto death. I do not say that you should pray for it. So here we just have a taste of the 1611, and you can see that it is more difficult to read because it is different, but it's not impossible to read. I mean, I can read it, but there would be certain things that would give me question, like, what is that? Giue him life? And then I have to, give. That U is a V. So I don't look at the 1611 very often. I look at the 1900 because the 1900 is just updated spelling mostly. But if there is a deeper question, I usually don't even go back to the 1611. I usually try to go to the Greek and figure it out there, or go to one of my trusted commentaries and see what they're saying. I hardly ever go back to the 1611. Maybe I should, but so the question that we're looking at right now, though, is verse 19. This is listed as an error in the King James. And we know that we are of God. The whole world lieth in wickedness. Wickedness. Okay? So let me get rid of this for a second. Okay, so let's just go back to the King James 1900. Here we go. It says, we know that we are of God. Oh, that's not the 1900. This is the 1900. Huh? It keeps taking me back over there. Sorry. I'll have to stop it in. There we go. Okay. And we know that we are of God, and the whole world lieth in wickedness. Same thing without the extra E at the end. Okay. There is a footnote here. What does that footnote say? It says a reference to chapter 2, verse 13, where it says where it says wicked one. Wicked one. And then Matthew 13:19, where it says wicked one. But here it's translated, the word is translated as wickedness. This is listed as an error by this list of errors, that this should be wicked one. Okay? Let's look at the New King James. The New King James translated, the whole world lies under the sway of the wicked one. Now let's look at the NASB. You know what it's going to say, right? Under the power of the wicked one. It's going to have wicked one there. The updated King James has wicked one. The older King James, the 1611, and the 1900 say lies in wickedness. This is listed as an error. Is this what we would consider to be an error? Did they get it wrong? Does the world lie in wickedness? Or the evilness of, or the power of the power of the wicked one? Well, what is the power of the wicked one? It is wickedness, is it not? Wickedness is the power of the evil one. Evilness is the power of the evil one. So if it lies in evilness, it's lying under the power of the evil one. Is it more clear the way it's rendered today? Okay, I'll accept that. This is just, but it's, again, this is a different way of saying it in English. This isn't an error where it would be an error if the King James says the whole world, the whole world lies in goodness, or the whole world lies in peaches. Those are errors, but you're talking about wicked one versus wickedness. One may be a little clearer to our ear today than what they would have associated in the past, and our next one really goes to this point. Let's look at the next one, because it will help us. It will kind of help us understand that the mentality, the culture that we live in today, the English language as we experience it today, is very different than theirs, and some of that affects how we think. Let's look at the next example, and we'll see that, because this one I liked. I liked the whole research process in this one. They said that these are listed together, that in Acts 7:45, which I have pulled up, and in Hebrews 4:8, this word right here. By the way, let me go to the. Let me go over here to the 16. This is the 1900. Excuse me. Acts 7:45. There we go. This word here that is rendered Jesus. Whoops, I didn't want to do that. Okay. This word rendered Jesus should be Joshua. In context, let's look at it. Which also our fathers that came after brought in with Jesus into the possession of the Gentiles, whom God drave out before the face of our fathers unto the days of David. Now let's back up for a little context in this. He's going through the history of Israel, and he talks about our fathers had the tabernacle of witnesses in the wilderness, as he had appointed, speaking unto Moses, okay, that he should make it according to the fashion that he had seen, which also our fathers that had came after brought in with Jesus into the possession of the Gentiles. Now, shouldn't that be Joshua? If you're following the history here of the Israelites, it should be Joshua into the possession of the Gentiles. And I was like, that's interesting. And the other one is kind of the same. If we go to Hebrews 4:8, we see that it's the same error. Okay. Hebrew 4:8. And if Jesus had given them rest, then would he not afterward had spoken of another day? Now, again, we go back into context, and we see that in context, this was Jacob. I'm sorry, Joshua. There we go. Created a whole new error. No, that this was Joshua. Okay. And even in the footnote here, this is the 1900. The footnote says that is Joshua. Okay. Also in Acts 7:45. Why would they render it Jesus and not Joshua? Now, first of all, I know just from my seminary days that the word Jesus is Yeshua. The word Joshua is Yeshua. Those are both the exact same word in Hebrew. Okay, Jesus and Joshua. The reason how we get Jesus is a little convoluted. It goes through the Greek, which is the Greek rendering of Yeshua is Yeshua. Anyway, it's pronounced almost, and it sounds a lot like Jesus. The reason why it is translated differently, Joshua and Jesus, is just for clarification's sake. Okay, the scholars, the how many ones? 16 or so scholars that created the authorized version of the Bible, they were aware of this. They were the ones who made these decisions. They didn't miss this. This wasn't an error. This was something done intentionally. Okay, in both places, the exact same word. Why did they do that when it's obviously talking about? And I'll grant whoever wants to argue with me, that this is obviously referring to Joshua, Old Testament Joshua. Why would they render it Jesus? New Testament Jesus. Because well, what was the reason? Joshua was to lead his people into the promised land, right? But they rebelled against it. And so he had to lead them through the wilderness, right? So then they went into the wilderness until they came back, and it was delayed. And then they went into the promised land under Joshua. Joshua led them into the promised land after a big delay. Jesus, let me go back to Acts 7:45. Jesus came to lead his people into the promised land, but they rejected him. And so they're in the wilderness, delayed until such time as he comes back and leads them into the promised land of salvation in his kingdom. So we have this similarity. By the way, the words both mean salvation of God. Okay, all right. Well, it's however you want to translate that, but God saves. God is salvation. However you want to render that in English. But that's what that word means, Yeshua. Okay. So the Bible translators are making this connection intentional between Jesus and Joshua. I found that fascinating. But let's talk about it as a mistake, as an error. Should they have rendered it Joshua? Well, the New King James, as I have pulled up here, the New King James does render it Joshua. All your modern versions of the Bible render it Joshua. It is only the 1900. I'm sorry. I was going to show you the 1900. No, the 1900 does have, the 1900 does have Jesus. So, in both places. But the New King James has Joshua. Okay. So, is it an error to say Joshua? It's the same word. It's Yeshua. It's the same word. Rendered in English, it can be rendered as Joshua or Jesus. They're intentionally rendering it as Jesus to make the connection that Jesus is Joshua to his people now. It's just a decision. is it the right decision to render it Jesus versus Joshua when it's obvious in the context that it's Joshua? Anybody who knows the Bible, anybody who is reading through this right here and seeing and knows the story of the Old Testament at all would know that that is referring to Joshua, even if it says Jesus. And they would go, wait, Jesus, you mean Joshua? Oh, Jesus is Joshua. They're the same. Okay? Joshua was a type of Jesus who was to come, that was going to lead his people into the promised land. So, is that an error? I don't know. I mean, well, no, it's not an error. Let me just say, it's not an error. Is it the best? Should you leave that connection to the reader to make instead of making it for him? Well, you know what? All of the scholars signed off on this. They all agreed with this rendering of making that Jesus instead of Joshua. So I kind of have to trust them on that. Either way, I know from reading this, they're making this connection between Jesus and Joshua. It's obviously Joshua, even let me go over to the 1900. Even in the 1900, I'm go back to Acts 7:45, where it's a little more obvious. The Hebrew is also obvious. The Hebrew passage is also obvious, but you got to know a little bit more. This one, you can just look at the context of the passage and see Moses, brought them, into the bush. That should be Joshua. Jesus was there. That was Joshua. So you can obvious. So it wasn't like they were trying to put one past you. Okay, they're rendering the exact same word as Jesus instead of Joshua because they're making that connection that Joshua was a type of Jesus. Okay, but they're not. Moses was a type of Jesus in certain situations, but you can't render the Hebrew word Moses as Jesus. But you can Yeshua. Okay. All right. So I don't count that as an error. Okay. Was it a poor decision? Was it a decision that could cause confusion in modern day readers or a novice Christian or somebody who didn't have the Old Testament? Maybe. Maybe. We could have that discussion. But it wasn't an error. That word can be translated Jesus. And so it's not an error. End of story. I think it's interesting. I think it's a fascinating subject to discuss, and maybe it should be in the updated King James and the New King James, it is Joshua. So it's one of those that we could talk about, that we could discuss, that we could have opinions about. I think it's fascinating. I think it's great, and I'm glad it's there. I'm glad it's there to discuss, and make that connection. But I would not consider that, and I would challenge anybody to consider that an error when it was done intentionally and it is proper. Yeshua is Jesus. Yeshua is Joshua. That is the same word in the Greek, because this is the Greek word behind that. Okay. I hope that this has helped you today gain some trust in your Bible. When you're reading the New King James or the King James, you can have complete confidence that you are reading a Bible that has been preserved by God throughout time, that it is the inerrant and infallible Word of God. And when you see footnotes in your modern Bible, please don't let that cause you doubt. Just go back and see what is the, I like the New Living, or I like the New American Standard, whatever it is that you read that you like, that was passed down to you. Maybe it's the Bible that you were saved with, or the Bible that your preacher uses. That's fine. But when you see those footnotes, don't let it cause any doubt in your mind that you can depend on the word of the Lord. Those scholars are not God. Okay? They are not divine, and they are not inspired by the Holy Spirit to make a decision to leave a passage out or to change a word. Go back and see what is the Bible. What is the Bible that the church has always had? What is the majority text, the visiting text, the Textus Receptus? What do they say? And by the way, there's no rendering difference. If you go to the Greek in those, the only difference is the way places are spelt. Okay, the way a city is spelt. The only differences in those are minute compared to the differences between those texts and the critical text. The critical, that's my whole argument, is that the Bible that the church has always had is the majority text, the Byzantine text, the received text. That family of texts are the same. Okay, those are all in Greek, and they are mostly in Greek. You could argue that there's some Latin texts. It's fine, doesn't matter. It's the Bible that the church has always had. It is super consistent. Like I said, it's the way names are spelt, or like we looked at the. Well, that's in English, so I won't make that argument. But anyway, but you can still see it in English when you look at the 1611 compared to the 1900. It's the exact same text. It's just spelled differently. You got extra E's and U's for V's and V's for U's. Okay, but it's the same text. It's the same meaning. It's the same words. And that is the case with the Bible that the church has always had. Okay, but with the NU, these modern texts that in the footnotes reference the latest or the oldest and best manuscripts don't have this verse. That's 2 texts out of thousands. 2 texts that were dug up in trash heaps in the 1800s, in the middle 1800s, dug up in trash heaps. Is that the way God preserves his word? In the Bible, what does he say? No, he says, I preserve my word by sharing it. It's the Bible the church has always had. The differences between those 2 texts and those 2 are like, and there's some other supporting papyri, but it's mainly the 2 texts, the Vaticanus and the Sinaiticus. The differences between those 2 texts and the majority text are huge, comparatively speaking. They're still not that big difference, but they have lots of omissions, and some very distinct differences, whereas the thousands over here agree. So, trust the thousands. Trust the majority text. Trust the text that God has preserved and not the one that man has discovered in archaeological digs. That's my point. Okay, don't let it cause you doubts. Don't let these footnotes and these things cause you to question. The more I research the preserved Word of God, the stronger my faith becomes. And I hope that it builds your faith too. All right, I've been on this show. This was supposed to be a quick one, and it hasn't turned out to be. I apologize. Hope you all have a great week.